focusing on the day the Great Flood began, and with a much focus on the events that occurred on that particular faithful day. So to begin with, I'll be looking at when the flood came by conducting a forensic analysis of the events. So we need to know that this particular presentation explores what truly happened on that day, and I'll be using biblical text from the Septuagint version of the Bible. I'll also be considering scientific logic, and then looking at various models from biblical cosmology, as well as some component of scientific model. And we need to understand the events actually began with a trigger. So we need to look at the divine judgment and when it begins. In Genesis 7, verse 11, according to the Septuagint version, it stated that in the 600th year of Noah's life, all the fountains of the great deep, or the great abyss, as stated in the Septuagint version, were broken up, and then the cataracts of heaven were opened. Here the word cataract refers to the windows, the opening of heaven were actually were opened. So from this verse, we see three events occurring concurrently or at the same time. We are going to explore these events to the detail, and then we will actually reason through it to make sense out of the Great Flood event. These three events consist of massive hydrological ruptures or breaking apart that defies modern rainfall only theory as proposed by some apologetics and some critics, with which they used to dismiss the biblical view of the Great Flood. So first and foremost, we're going to look at the sources of the flood waters, and the first source is what I call the cosmic source, and that has to do with the windows of heaven. And the Greek word used here is kataragi, and here it doesn't mean rainfall, it means waterfall. It's like huge drops of water falling down, more or less like the opening of a floodgate of a dam. So here we are not dealing with a cloud or drizzle or with the rain that we are used to. We are looking at something more cosmically biblical or cosmologically biblical. So Genesis teaches that the earth was enclosed by a firmament. That is the model. The word firmament refers to the word stereoma. It is the same word in Hebrew as rakia, as stated in Genesis 1 verse 6 to 8. It describes it as, according to ancient Jewish text, as a solid structure separating the waters above from those on the earth. So here, on the day the Great Flood came down, the windows of heaven, the windows in this crystalline dome, or the firmament, or the stereoma, or the rekaya, were broken up, not by human but by supernatural means, and this released massive volumes of water from above the sky, not rain. It was huge drop of floodgates of water pouring down. So we try to apply scientific logic to make sense out of the fact that rainfall from clouds alone, as proposed by most apologetics and the flood critics, isn't enough. It won't be enough to actually flood the whole earth, because according to modern climatology, even if all the water in the clouds all across the globe were to fall as rain, it will cover only 1 inch of the earth. It won't be enough to cause the kind of flooding as dictated by the Bible. So we need to know the Great Flood wasn't just some kind of rain-only event. For it to be achieved, for the kind of flood stated in the Bible to be achieved, it demands other sources of water. This supernatural event, it was highly a necessity to cause the great flood. And the second source is what I call the atmospheric source. So we have the cosmic source dealing with the opening of the floodgate. Now we have the atmospheric source, which is the second source. Now here we see from Genesis that the earth experienced rainfall continuously for 40 days and 40 nights. According to Genesis 7 verse 12 in the Septuagint version, it stated that the rain was upon the earth for 40 days and nights. Now we need to know those who wrote the Bible are not dumb. These are not cavemen, people working in animal skin. These people knew embroidery. They knew metallurgy. They know the difference between rainfall. They know the difference between a river. They know a lake. They knew about the three states of water. They know that water can exist in three forms. They know the difference between solid water, liquid water, and gaseous water. If you read through the Bible, we see all those three forms of existence of water being mentioned. The writers of the Bible knew about vapor, they knew about ice, they knew about snow, they knew about rivers, they knew about sea or ocean or the deep. Okay. They also knew about rainfall. So here, the same book, the same Genesis, the same narrator is saying here, it rained on earth both day and night, continuously, non-stop for 40 days and night. And then it goes on to say, this was not a normal weather. It was a supernaturally sustained storm that lasted for 960 consecutive hours. And this additional source of water actually increased the momentum to the rising flood event. It added to the saturation of the surface. So with this second source, now we have two sources. One coming from the waters above, and then secondly coming from the clouds that are within the firmament. So this will take us to the third source. Now the third source of water for the flood is what I call the terrestrial source. This has to do with the fountains of the great deep, what the Greek word called abuso, or what we call in English the abyss. The Hebrew and the Greek text agree, said all the fountains of the abyss were broken. It didn't say some, it said all of it. So let's look at the second component. What does it say? It said these are not springs. See, what we are dealing here are not springs or geysers. This is what the Bible called abyss. The word abusos or abyss, it deals with what we call a primordial subterranean waters or underworld ocean. According to scientific journal, a certain scientific journal that was released, it stated that they've discovered a huge subterranean ocean, almost twice the size of the surface ocean. So here the Bible is also saying that the fountains of the abyss were actually split open to allow the waters that are under it to gush out. This supports the modern scientific discovery of a huge subterranean waters. The earth crust was torn apart by the tectonic upheaval, and this actually led to a hydrothermal explosion, and all volcanoes on earth that you can think about all ruptured, leading to a massive crustal displacement. It was chaotic, it was huge. Beneath the crust were vast chambers of supercritical water, okay, what we call the deep water reservoirs, which are under the crust of the earth. All these things were open and then they gushed out. So this forms the third source of the great flood waters. It wasn't just rainfall, as critics try to point to us and use it to dismiss the great flood argument. The Bible knows better. Listen to the information being given to you by the Bible. Most apologetics ignore, but you have to pay attention to the scripts. The script is telling you there were three sources of water that flooded the earth. So we need to know all these high pressure systems exploded and caused instantaneous and worldwide subduction and vertical crash shifts. And this is exactly what you need if you really want to flood the earth, submerge the entire earth, even the highest level under great waters. You don't need only rainwater from the clouds. You need all the water that is hidden in every corner of the planet, of the earth, in order to achieve just that. So over here, what do we see? We find threefold flood system, and this is not by accident. All these things are by deliberate design. There are three sources that came together to flood the entire earth. We have source one, which deals with the waters above the firmament. The Hebrew word is the windows of heaven. The Greek word is kataragi, or the kataragi, and this was actually a floodgate that opened in the crystalline sky dome to unleash its contents. So there was a source of water from above the firmament. According to Genesis, God created the firmament to separate the waters above from the waters below. So the waters above poured down, came down, and then we have the second source that deals with the natural, normal rainfall. And we know if all the clouds were to empty itself on earth, if all the clouds were to empty themselves, it won't still be enough to cause the great flood event. So the second source, which is a natural, normal rainfall that we all used to, like this was here, it rained continuously for 40 days and 40 nights. A day is the period between sunset and sunrise. And then over here, according to the narrative, it rained continuously. And then the Greek word is the word hiatos. And guess what? According to this source, this mechanism caused rainfall on earth continuously. A massive rainstorm which lasted for 40 days and 40 nights. This constituted the second source of the great flood waters. The last source came from underneath the earth crust. As God separated the waters above from the waters below, some of the waters below receded into the bottom. I'll be doing a study on Genesis. We're going to discover how there are waters under the earth during creation. And the Hebrew word is the fountains of the deep. With the Greek word is abuso, or pigai abuso, talking about the fountains of the great deep. What did this source do? It led to an unleashing or an upthrust or an explosion of or rupture of subterranean reservoirs. The scripture states that all of them were open, meaning there isn't one, there were several of them. Ancient Jewish texts state that there are 7 water tombs which are actually in the crust of the earth. But then, well, the Bible doesn't tell us about the number, but it tells us something. It said all of them were open. All the great abysses with huge water reserves exploded at the same time. You can't imagine. You don't want to be in such a world where the whole earth shakes and keeps on shaking for a long time like a quake. I'll be talking more about it as we move on. Here, modern models cannot explain a global deluge of this biblical nature with just rainfall. Just rainfall won't do it. If you pay attention to the biblical text, we won't miss a thing. Most of the time we miss so many things because we add our own personal ideology and things we have acquired during our lifetime, things we have been taught. Most of them are actually not correct. Most of the things we know about the Bible are incorrect. About more than half of the things we know about the Bible are wrong. This came from people who did not actually pay attention to the text, and they added their own ontological view to it, distorting and contorting the word, weakening the context of the word, making the word of God of no effect. But if you pay attention to the text, you will discover that the critics are not even criticizing it correctly because they're not even paying attention, and the apologetics are also not doing enough by paying attention to the scripts, because rainfall alone won't do it. The Bible already refuted this notion by providing a multi-source geocosmic flood system, and this was over 3,000 years ago. So that is it. Now you may wonder, why does this matter? Why this thing matters actually is because of the wrong assumptions that are actually connected to the flood event. And the aim is to break from modern erroneous assumptions. Modern ridicule of the flood, they are all based on false assumption that the event was caused only by rain. There are even those who claim that the flood was just localized, because within their reasoning, within their ontology, their thinking, and their paradigm of reasoning, it can't just happen, because all they know is just we only get water from rain. It's rain that causes flood. That's all that we know. The biblical model presents something way different, something more complex, catastrophic, well orchestrated, following supernatural laws. Well, if I say supernatural law, I'm not talking about something miraculous. I'm talking about something within our natural ecosystem, natural universe that we haven't discovered yet. So here, the Great Flood was caused by celestial disruption, atmospheric saturation, we have tectonic rupture, and geological chaos. These three forces combined together to submerge the entire earth. This thing isn't done by somebody who wants to just deceive somebody. This isn't just a fluke. This is not a fiction. This is not a fairy tale. This was done by the same person who created the world, the one who built the house, or the one who constructed a castle knows the secret in the doorways to the castle. So the one who built the earth knows how to submerge it. Our thinking, our knowledge today isn't enough to actually reveal how, or to show us how we can actually submerge the entire. We think if we explode all the nuclear bombs on Earth, we can destroy all life on Earth. Yet it is not proven, because we did not create the Earth. We also cannot destroy. You can't destroy what you can't create, even though there are those who try to destroy. So we have to know, to fully submerge the earth, to fully flood the earth, you need multiple sources. You need more than just rainfall to even cover the highest mountains that was on earth. So let's look at total submersion, how the mountains were covered according to the Septuagint version of Genesis 2:30. Said the waters rose 15 cubits higher and covered all the high mountains under heaven. All, meaning there were several high mountains before the Great Flood. Remember, these mountains were created during creation, during the formation of the earth. And here the Genesis account states that all the high mountains, like we have today, we have several high mountains. In those days also, in the pre-flood world, there were many high mountains. He said all of them were actually covered, and they all went down 15 cubits. 15 cubits today is an equivalent of 7 meters, which is an equivalent of 700 centimeters. So how high were those mountains? We're not given information on it, but all of them were submerged. This cannot be just achieved by any natural precipitation or tsunami alone. The Bible has given us its sources. So this actually tells us a massive redistribution of global water storage and a release mechanism were involved to achieve that. Let's look at some scientific confirmation of the catastrophic water release. So over here, we will be looking at modern discovery, which points to water-rich mountain zones beneath the earth crust. Looking at the transition zones, that is about 410 to about 600 kilometers deep. Now, this was actually discovered some few years ago. And then also, we can also consider massive fossil graveyards, huge fossil graveyards, all suggesting rapid sedimentary burial. This thing cannot just occur in a natural rainfall or precipitation mechanism. We also have evidence of underwater forests and deep sea fossils found on mountain ranges all across the earth. All these things support the reality that yes, the waters from below erupted with violent intensity and global consequences. So the three sources of water, as stated in the Bible, all left behind their fingerprints or their evidence, which we can today analyze to show, yes, God knew what he was doing. Those instructions were real. So what about the flood? Let's look at the flood. Well, this wasn't like the normal flood that we are used to. We've experienced several floods, but none of them come in comparison to the Great Flood. So the Great Flood, it was not a regional disaster as some Christian scientists try to propose. Because yes, we understand that as they interpret the evidence to suit the modern scientific way of doing things, they still can't fathom how a great flood can actually submerge all the highest mountain. So they say it's regional. Now, a regional flood cannot actually do what the Bible said. It flood all the highest mountains under heaven. Those are the statements we ignore. This was not caused by weather systems alone. It was heavily engineered judgment that broke the entire system of creation, above, around, and beneath. This is a judgment to end life that are actually terrestrial mammal life forms, and to do so, you need to submerge Pangea. To submerge Pangea, you need multiple sources of water. So 3 hydrological sources are identified. First of all, the first one is celestial, where the heavens opened. Then we have the atmospheric sources, which dealt with the rainfall. And then we have the geological sources, which deals with the rupturing of the abyss. The great flood of Noah, it was God executing judgment, because God told Noah, I myself am bringing the great flood waters. So to achieve that, you need multiple sources to do that. And God did not bring flood from heaven. He used the water reserves that are actually present in our universe. Note that the biblical model is totally different from the scientific model, something which is also being ridiculed today, even by mainstream Christians. They find it very ridiculous when you talk about it. But without it, none of these things can be true. If we believe this thing occurred, then the model of the earth, as stated in the Bible, should also be looked at. So we need to understand that Noah's Ark was not only a vessel of survival, it was a theological protest against the rebellion of the world in the mercy of the Creator who remakes them. The one who created the world is the same one who gave the specification for making the ark, and the one who gave the specification is the same person who brought the flood waters. He knows where to get the waters to flood the entire earth. We human beings, within our thinking, because we deal with what we see and can think and we can feel and measure, we only see rainfall. We don't believe there are waters above that can fall like rainfall, like the Septuagint Bible calls Karaja, talking about waterfall, like a waterfall, not rainfall. So it makes it difficult for us to comprehend. Now we are going to do a forensic reconstruction of the day the flood came. We want us to look at it theoretically, not just like drama. We're looking at how it would have occurred. Imagine if we were living during the days of the Great Flood, and it began. How did it feel? How was the feeling like in those days? So for the introduction, we need to look at Luke 17:26, and it's from Jesus Christ. He said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. So here, it gives us two information in one. It tells us how his coming will be, and then secondly, it gives us a window of time, telling us that our timeline will be just like the timeline of Noah. So we need to understand the statement of Jesus. It wasn't a metaphor, it wasn't an allegory, it wasn't symbolic, it was real, it was predictive, it was telling us, giving us direction. He described a day calm on the surface, yet hiding the greatest judgment in human history. So we're going to look at a forensic reenactment of that day, as Jesus Christ showed us the way, reviewed how the day was. And this is based on scriptural clues, scientific patterns, ancient cosmological truth. So the day the flood came would have been a morning, a peaceful, but then very deceiving. It was a world that was very calm, and the sun rose as usual. Children would have been playing around, birds would have been singing. Everything looked so normal, okay, and it was just like that as usual. The sun rose over the ancient supercontinent Pangaea. That is one massive landmass inhabited by billions of humans and non-humans, just as we see spread across the continent. We know the day the Great Flood came was the time the world was recovering from the Great Warfare, an event captured in the Bible and also in other ancient history. According to the Word of God, according to Jesus, people ate, drank, farmed, married, danced, believing their golden age had arrived, because mankind and the Nephilim had actually come out of the great warfare that occurred, and they were now recovering. They thought, well, they have entered into their golden age. And however, around the world, along different longitudes, yes, people were beginning or ending their day. The sun was rising on one longitude and setting on another. Breakfast in the east and supper was being served in the west. But then clouds began to form, and it became very thick and very dark. It wasn't strange because it was normal. It looked like just any other heavy rainy season. To one side of the earth, it was a rainy season. To the other side, it wasn't a rainy season. But it may have felt like, yes, it's just another day. If only Noah who knew what was actually going to happen on the horizon. But then the heavens were about to break. Hell was about to break loose. Then this takes us to the cosmic disturbance that occurred. And as things were unfolding, like as if it is just another day, suddenly the windows of heaven opened. This was just an unexpected event. A thunderclap, a mega thunderclap, unlike any in history, actually exploded across the atmosphere. What happened? The thundering that shook the very air, the very atmosphere, just like a vortex, like an impact from billions of atomic bomb explosions. And what actually happened? The entire dome, the firmament, the raphia, the stereoma shook and cracked. The windows of heaven were supernaturally torn open. That led to so many events happening. The catastrophe, that's a cosmic waterfall, poured down. This event would have been associated with massive thundering, massive lightning, which would have gone on in that entire day, because the Bible says in the same day, all these things happen within the same day. A non-stop lightning and a non-stop thundering and a non-stop wind and a gush and a burst of thunderstorm, sandstorm, and all kinds of storms you can imagine would have erupted across the globe, as massive part of the earth were actually charred, damaged by the Great War. So the water poured down. Genesis 7 verse 11, according to the Septuagint version, states that the floodgates of heaven were opened. Lightning storm flashed globally. The skies grew pitch black, and then birds began to fly in a panic mood. Animals began to act erratically. Children would have been screaming their lungs out. Adults would have frozen in terror. Yes, it began like a normal day, but no, this isn't normal. This unlike anything they have actually heard. The atmosphere was heavy with terror, fear. The sky had gone darker, and then the atmosphere was the vibrations, the shakings, aftermath when the windows of heaven had opened, and there were huge flashes of lightning splashing across east and west, north and south. Birds were flying, they were gone haywire. Animals would have been running here and there. Children would have been screaming. Adults would have been also shouting out of fear. People were running here and there, but they've never witnessed such a thing before. Noah would have actually also would have been drowned with fear, because what he had been told by God has finally come through. But that was not the end of the story. Pangea, as we knew it, was about to split. This is how modern day depicts Pangea in the Bible. And as much as the heavens were actually cracking open, the splitting of the earth, the splitting of the firmament, would have led to the raining down of rocks from the heavens, as written in the book of in other biblical books. For example, the book of Enoch speaks about in a dream of Enoch. Here he sees some of the heavenly beings casting down rocks, fiery stones falling from the heavens, which would have killed countless large terrestrial animals as well as humans. So here's the thing: the windows of heaven split open, waterfall is pouring down, and then here you have the atmosphere turned red, which speaks of light. That is a huge gigantic meteor shower raining down on humans and animals and civilization simultaneously. That would have been some kind of the colossal megaliths, earth fragments raining down skyward, because once the windows of heaven were split open, the droplets, the fragments, would have actually smashed the surface of the earth, causing massive devastating impact. So these heavenly and terrestrial judgments formed a dual assault that changed the earth and wiped out nearly all air-breathing life forms. The atmosphere would have been quaking, the heavens would have been shaken. So here we have already seen the rainfall happening. We have seen the windows of heaven cracking open, causing mega cosmic upheaval, shaking the very soul of mankind, and even shaking animals alike. Wind would have been blowing left and right. Now, in as much as all these things were happening, the atmosphere collapsed. A massive atmospheric disturbance damped non-stop for 40 days and 40 nights. Global winds swept across the earth. It was so huge, a windstorm never experienced before. Thunder roared without break. It was thundering non-stop. We may call it the mother of all thunderclaps, the mother of all lightning. Mega thundering, mega lightning, mega flashes, mega winds. Everything was of mega proportion. You can just imagine, within that same day, within hours, towns were flooded with massive rain. Rivers overflowed. Remember, it was raining non-stop, heavy rains. It wasn't just rain. You also understand that when once thunder clapped, okay, you find ice falling, hail, and all kinds of precipitation did occur. And yet, it was just the day one of something that was supposed to unfold. So, in effect, we know what you know. Earth's foundation will have to break, and that would have actually been being the nail in the whole thing. Already we've seen the windows of heaven break open. Now and the world is experiencing a mega precipitation. Now, even though these two were enough to cause a massive chaos, as if it wasn't enough. Genesis 7 verse 11 said, "All," it said, "and all," meaning after the windows of heaven had broken open, after the rain began to fall on earth for 40 days, to start the 40 days downpour, he said, and then all, on top of all this chaos, he said, all means all, not few. All the fountains of the great abyss, it burst open. Now imagine the great abyss bursting open within Pangea and within the oceans. The movement, the splitting of the continental plates would have caused a global mega earthquake, the longest and the most powerful that cannot be recorded on any scale, on any system, on any device. The Richter scale, I don't think would have been able to record it. It would have gone haywire. This would have shooken the entire planet. In fact, the entire Pangea would have been moving haywire, moving in all directions. You couldn't stand still. You could feel the vibration, the energy. The earth would have been moving left and right, front and back, up and down. The earth is shaking. The sky, the heavens, the atmosphere is also vibrating. The rain is falling. There is wind. I don't think it would have been the best time to be existent. Volcanoes all over the world, because of what is happening up in the sky and down beneath the earth, all erupted. Not one or two, hundreds of them, all of them, belching fire, lava, began to vomit. All these kinds of things. It was vomiting fire, vomiting lava, huge amount of smoke, toxic plumes of gases. Cities were being split in half because of the foundations of the earth breaking apart. Massive earthquake causing cities to split. The people will be falling into the great abyss. Parts of buildings would have collapsed. People will be holding on to each other to prevent their loved ones from falling. People were screaming, shouting, calling for help. Smoke, as the earth split, people could see the lava, hot lava flowing, gushing up like a fountain. It would have been a chaotic movement. Lowlands were lifted up as the fountains were breaking. Remember, the earth was shaking to and fro, front and back, up and down. So you people will be bouncing and deading like a tennis ball. Lowlands would have been uplifted to become new mountains. Mountains sank into the oceans. It was chaos. The supercontinent Pangea began to split apart. It first had to split into two, north and south, as the continental plate began to break into pieces, forming new islands. And then some part of it began to sink. Mostly places inhabited by the Nephilims were all drowned. They all began to sink. Yes, the legendary Atlantis, something that is also hinted in the Bible as a city called Cries, sank. A World Trade Center, a global trade nation city or city-state, also sank into the earth. Civilization near fault lines, cities, and then empires, buildings that were stationed along the fault lines because of the opening of the fountains of the Great Deep along the fault lines were swallowed. Civilization, people in their millions, the entire billions of people, of humans and Nephilims, were all being killed by that event. Remember, the foundations of the earth actually began to break. Things began to happen, and it was chaotic. It wasn't a world you would want to live in. The ocean surged. Remember, the earthquake occurred under the ocean and also on the Pangea. That would have brought water on the surface of the earth. Yes, now that was just a trigger that started something else, because as the fountains of the Great Deep began to split and the earthquakes were occurring both on land and the sea, massive tsunamis triggered by ocean floor rupture surged over land. Places that blew a little bit calm would have actually seen, in fact, more specifically, places located by the coastal areas or coastal civilization. Cities located along the edges of Pangea, or maybe a few kilometers away from Pangea, would have seen a huge wall of water. They would have been wondering, what is that? What is that huge wall, right? Because they wouldn't have seen it before. And what they will be seeing would have been waves over a mile, more than a kilometer high, coming towards them, sweeping them away, sweeping away cities, towns, forests, plains, humans and Nephilims and animals, both big and small, both terrestrial, amphibians, reptiles, insects, entire herds of animals, vegetation, Humans, structures, all would have been washed away. I mean, the tsunamis would have been coming from every direction because the Panja was surrounded by the oceans of water, and whatever was happening in all directions. So people would have been smashed together from east and west. I mean, the great waters, the great waves would have smashed them from either direction, and it would have led to a great confusion. Some were buried under ash from volcanoes, places where there are volcanic eruptions, or places located. These volcanoes would have just appeared. Volcanoes that haven't erupted for many centuries would have just erupted. Remember, when the fountains of the Great Deep actually opened, it affected all the volcanoes on Earth, and cities and towns located near mega volcanoes would have been all buried under the ash and fossilized. Mud flows, landslides, sedimentation, soil liquefaction would have buried so many towns, villages, and mega cities, fossilizing them instantaneously. Chemical rain and ash cloud would have actually filled the atmosphere as volcanoes release sulfur, ash, radioactive gases into the atmosphere. The world then wouldn't have been a nice place to be. This pristine atmospheric air rich with oxygen would have become highly poisonous. So here we have rain falling down, and then we have the waterfall mixing up with this ash, as well as the cosmic radiation. As the fountains of the Great Deep and the windows of heaven opened, waters went up and fell down. The waters from above would have absorbed radiation from outer space, and then mixed up with it, and then fell back. And this would have actually erupted minerals from the earth as a result of the volcanic eruption. So minerals from the earth, cosmic radiation from the sky, and then the great waters from precipitation and from the waterfall would have actually mixed up perfectly to become acidic and chemically reactive. Breathing would have become very difficult for those who are actually located. I mean, for everybody who existed on Earth, there's nowhere to run to in those days. The skies would have gone darker globally. I mean, visibility would have been very bad. The rain is falling, and a lot of mud are being released on the surface of the earth. People are being buried. The ground would have become slippery. Cannibals would have been eating humans. All kinds of things would have been killed because animals would have lost their sense of reason. The rainfall that was pouring down was no longer just pure water falling down. It would have been a new rain poisoned with these gases from volcano space, and this would have contaminated the freshwater systems, changing it in chemistry for good. Among all this, in the midst of the chaos, what happened? The ark, built according to the divine plan, the divine blueprint, lifted gently on the rising waters. Noah and his passengers had already gone in. Only 8 humans survived inside. Only 8 humans were inside. Noah and his family. Alongside them were around 1,000 animal genus, carefully selected. Okay, you have to understand that not all life. This was just terrestrial, land-dwelling vertebrates adapted for survival in that world. The ark was sealed, so there was no turning back. The world was made. A perfect world created was now undergoing a massive and a gradual change. From that day on, the world would never be the same, because the firmament was broken, the fountains of the Great Deep emptied. This is so serious. As the fountains of the Great Deep emptied, it did so for 150 days. Water gushed onto the surface, and this continued long after the rain had stopped. But the rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights. But then the waters from the Great Deep it actually prevailed on Earth, on the surface of Earth, for 150 days. Sediments and minerals covered the entire landscape as they came out of the earth, giving rise to fossil beds, coral layers, and marine fossils on mountains. So as the waters gushed from the great deep, it formed layers, and then this layer would have hardened quickly, and then another layer would have formed, and a new layer would have formed, forming the various layers that we see across the world. The earth crust changed. It was totally changed. It was reshaped. The pre-flood atmosphere was no longer existing. It was destroyed, and then it became a new harsh irradiated biosphere as it is today. Yes. So among all these things, who survived? So we need to know we had some humans that survived this massive chaos, referring to all but Noah's family. Only 8 people survived. What about the land vertebrates? That specific group of genus that were selected, all land animals perished except those on the ark. What about marine life? Did the animals in the oceans and water bodies survive? Yes, actually so. Some survived. Those that were able to adapt quickly to the ever-changing environment survived, but majority couldn't survive because the waters were so polluted. Only a few would have survived. Only their eggs would have survived. Yes, their eggs would have. Some would have laid eggs that would have actually undergo hibernation or dormancy for that period of time, because after a year, that's when everything will normalize. So it is inconclusive to say all marine life survive. Remember, there are marine lives that breathe through their lungs, like whales and dolphins. They would have to come up on the surface of the ocean from time to time to breathe. Now, with this polluted atmosphere and with ever-changing chemistry of the ocean, they will have to adapt quickly, and they have to do so, otherwise they won't survive. What about plants? Yeah, the roots, the seeds, the spores, can survive, and others didn't survive. What about reptiles and insects? Of course, many survived because of their resilient biological nature. They are amphibious, and they can adapt to both land and water. So yes, most reptiles survive. What about microorganisms? Most of them also survived, and most also underwent massive mutations that allowed them, because microorganisms are able to mutate faster than macroorganisms. So most of them mutated into different forms that could survive the ever-changing climatic condition. Bacteria, fungi, and protozoa. It's possible some even may have evolved into viruses. As Genesis 7:23 stated, every living substance that was upon the face of the ground was destroyed. So this statement suggests, according to the narrator, the person is narrating what he saw. He saw the earth. There are 3 regions: the atmosphere, land, and the water bodies. Here he said, only those animals, creatures that are on land, were destroyed. What about those that were in the air? Well, whatever goes up will definitely come down. So birds also form part of the land animals, hence they were also destroyed. What about those in the sea? Here he doesn't talk about the face of the ground. He said those that were on the face of the ground perished. Those that are in water, it means they didn't perish. But that is not conclusive to say some may have perished, as the earth was splitting apart, as the volcanoes underwater, under sea, under ocean volcanoes, whether it's under ocean, sea, or water, gushed out and released smoke, sulfur, and poisonous gases, as well as minerals. Some animals may have died. So it is right to say, some survived. Most survived in the ocean. Some died. What happened? The world was actually remade. A world reset. The oxygen-rich, radiation-protected, large pre-flood world was no more, it was gone. A world of giants, superior biodiversity, climate perfect, was replaced by thinner air, harsh sunlight, fragmented continent, high salinity ocean, shortened lifespan, genetic bottlenecks. The world of Noah's time was no more. It was destroyed and it was remade. It wasn't made this time to allow humans to thrive like it was before. It was completely different, emerging from the water. So, what are our thoughts on all these things happening? We have to understand that just as it was in the days of Noah, a world lured by peace but ripe for judgment, so shall it be. The day the flood began was the day of unmaking, a divine act of judgment and mercy. This flood wiped clean the earth and reset human history. Something we need to know. So what was the world like after the flood? Yes, the post-flood atmospherics changed. There was a shift. On the flood, oxygen level dropped gradually to what it is today. UV radiation increased and causing due to loss of atmospheric shielding. The climate diversified with the formation of poles, desert, and seasonal extremes. Lifespans dropped drastically from 900 plus years to 120 or even lower. But today, the new creation is not limited by time. This shift is documented well in Genesis. Genesis chapter 9, chapter 10, and chapter 11 shows a clear decline in human longevity. So the new world, like it is today, has become hostile with high disease vulnerability and reduced biological vitality. That's some of the evidence we have to support these claims. We have modern science which confirm the plausibility of this environment. We have paleobotany showing fossilized plants with massive growth rates and minimal stress marks. Gigantism in fossils matches oxygen-rich model of Paleozoic ecosystem. We have radiation and genetic mutation rates, which is very high after the flood, supporting biblical model of aging and genetic degradation. We have modern climatic models which shows oxygen was increased by even 10%. UV shielding was stronger in the days before the flood, and then the entire biosphere would change. In other words, if we want to live like the pre-flood world, all we have to do is to increase our present oxygen levels by 10% and also to increase our UV shielding. And if we're able to do that, if we can create such an environment, the entire ecosystem, the biosphere will just change drastically. It will make conditions ideal for gigantism and long life. The world after the flood was actually inferior to the world before the flood. The earth before the flood had more oxygen, less carbon dioxide, more water vapor and humidity, more stable temperatures. Conditions were just excellently perfect. Animals could grow larger and longer, and everything was feasible with massive ecosystem and fewer environmental limits. Today's world is less hospitable and less adaptable. The earth torn apart, post-flood geological transformation is clearly seen in what happened as the fountains of the great deep ruptured. Things began to change. We see a tectonic level upheaval as the earth split open, and this splitting wasn't gentle. It was very violent. The great waters of the flood wasn't gentle, it was very violent, as it is seen in the proportions of the ark, which is designed for sailing rough waters. In terms of tectonic shift and continental division after the flood, the once unified landmass, the famous Pangea, began to break apart. tectonic activity had increased. It has actually increased since then, as Genesis 10:25 said. Unto Eber was born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. So the Hebrew word used here is niflega, meaning to split, to divide, or to separate. This is not just linguistic separation like Babel, because the Babel event and the Peleg event happened simultaneously, not separately. And so the separation of the earth wasn't just linguistic, it was also continental separation. And there are scientific evidence to support this idea. We have continental drift and plate tectonics. We have fossils of identical species found on the coast of continents now separated by oceans like South America and Africa. Matching geological formation, if you look at rock types in both continents, you can see they are very identical. And this is actually so for several continents. 2 continents or 3 continents sharing the same geological rocks, mineral composition, and biodiversity. So this separation likely occurred. It did not that it likely occurred. It was very rapid because it was in the days of Peleg. That means the time he was born until he matured, the earth was slowly, but in a rapid way, splitting. Science shares a similar view. However, the only difference between scientific view and biblical view has to do with time. That is it. Most of the modern scientific discoveries align perfectly with the Bible, except the issue or the factor of time. The difference between the two is time. So time is different. On one side, time is measured in the hundreds of thousands and millions. On the other side, time is measured in just thousands. So that suggests that there is something. Whatever the Bible is saying is true, because the Bible is the first to make those claims. Science made the claims, is making the claims later on. So whatever the Bible has said, science is discovering. So who is right? Is it a scientific view? Is it science, or is it the Bible? Because science is trying to learn. The Bible is saying, I know it already. So who is right? Is it the scientist, the scientific view, or the biblical view? Definitely, who proposed the idea first? It was the Bible. So if the Bible made the claims first, and it was actually discovered or proven later on by science, it doesn't mean science is accurate over the Bible. It means the Bible is accurate, but science is actually discovering it. But the only discrepancy between the two is the factor of time. And here we know time, even if time is measured in millions in science, that's not a problem, because time is relative. According to the 20th century greatest discovery of time, we know that time is relative. So in science, it took millions of years, but then in the Bible, it took just a few years for it to occur. And both cases are correct. Both views are accurate. We know that because time is relative. So here is a model of the tectonic shift and continental division that occurred during the days of Peleg after the flood. All these things occurred within the 350 years after the flood of Noah's life. And then the earth continent began to split. Pangea, the once unified landmass, began to break apart, and it's still separating. What happened during and after the flood is that before the flood, the earth had fewer mountains, but after the flood, we see massive orogenic events. Mountain building is happening. The Himalayas, the Andes, the Alps, the Rockies, they all show signs of rapid uplift. Marine fossils at high altitude evidence these mountains were once under water. They once formed the ocean floor. We also see intense crustal compression and faulting. Volcanic activity also exploded after the flood. Layers of basalt and lava flows cover entire regions across the earth. Many mountains today are volcanoes or remnants of flood era tectonic vents. When the windows of flood, and most specifically when the fountains of the Great Deep opened, all the volcanoes erupted, and then they have become mountains today. The ocean basins and new water distribution were also affected, since newly formed ocean trenches and basins were actually most probably where the waters of the Great Flood receded into, as described in Genesis 8 verse 3 to 5. So the waters returned from the earth continually, and after 150 days, the waters had decreased. So the waters came on earth continuously for 7 months and receded continuously. It prevailed on earth for 5 months and receded after 6 months. What changed? What changed? The deep ocean, just like the Mariana Trench, may have actually be the result of subducted crust during or after the flood. Either way, it cannot be before. It was during the flood or after the flood. This led to the formation of new coastal lines and continental shelves formed as the water levels stabilized. We have floodplains and also sedimentary layers forming rapidly and bearing organic material, producing the fossil record we studied today. What happened to the climatic zones and the earth tilt? The catastrophic geological events changed the tilting of the Earth's axis according to the scientific model, leading to distribution of sunlight, ocean currents, jet streams, formation of ice caps and deserts. This shaped the climatic zones drastically, and now we have polar regions freezing, and today we have woolly mammoths found in flash frozen with food in their mouths. We have tropical zones drying into desert like the Sahara, which was once a lush habitat. This led to the introduction of seasons, what is written in Genesis 8:22, which suggests emerged clearly after the flood, where all the current seasons were formed. When he said, while the earth remains, seed time, harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter. So we see the extremes being established by divine order. Erosion, sedimentation, and the new phase of the earth actually were as a result of immense hydraulic forces of the flood. This stripped topsoil, carved out canyons like the Grand Canyon, likely formed rapidly during the post-flood, and also across the Sahara Desert. You can see, if you look at it from Google Earth, you can see how a massive erosion, like a washing down, occurred. This thing wouldn't have occurred just over a century. It would have occurred starting from the Great Flood. And these created strata layers filled with fossils, many in dead poses, buried suddenly. Some fossils were even eating, some were fighting, some were even giving birth. So how could they have just happened naturally? These things were as a result of the flood. We have sedimentary rock layers which often stretch across continents. You see these white things covering the surface of the earth globally, stretching across the continent from Africa, from Southern Africa to Western Africa, all across. You see these huge, massive, beautiful white sands covering the surface of the earth, suggesting all those places were either buried under the ocean or were sedimentation deposited on the surface of the earth as a result of the Great Flood, when the waters were gushing out of the fountains of the Great Deep. So all this evidence of sedimentation across the earth, across the continents of the earth, with their rock layers, such as the global water movement, mass burial, something which is not local. It was a gradual process, however violent, and it was worldwide. So in comparison with regards to geological events, we can see here concerning the traditional view and the flood model view. So by comparing the two views, we can see continental separations and occurring. In the scientific view, it took millions of years. However, in the flood model view, according to the biblical, just occurred quickly and rapidly during the Great Flood. We see mountains forming slowly in the traditional mountain formation, but in the flat view, this thing occurred quickly through violent thrusting and volcanic activity. Fossil record would have taken millions to form, but this thing would have occurred rapidly through sedimentation. We see gradual erosion, subduction from tectonic collapse from the flat view, and we see the massive sedimentary layering across the earth. And we know, according to the scientific view, this was a slow deposition. However, the biblical view suggests rapid layering from the flowing waters. So, what can we conclude from this? We say after the flood, the earth was changed totally, and nothing remained the same. The deserts were forming, the climate changing, the planet has now become chaotic. The world we live in is not what it used to be, as continents keeps on drifting apart. It is just surreal, just wonderful experience, as at the end of it, the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat, and the doors were open. Noah would have seen the world washed, cleansed, bathed in the great waters, fractured, a changed atmosphere, though fresh, as it was just a starting point, and he couldn't have even recognized the world he was seeing. All the nations and the cities and the people and the animals were all gone, except some few plants growing and the marine animals. Yeah, but life emerged. From a few foundational kinds, the genus, came the vast diversity we see. So the genus that went into the ark, through speciation, genetic variation, climatic adaptation, diversified itself and recreated itself in the new world. He said Noah should select the kind. So let's look at the word kinds. Genesis 6 verse 7. Leviticus confirms that Noah was commanded to take 2 of every kind. The exact same word you use in Genesis 1. It's also used in Genesis chapter 6 and chapter 7. The Hebrew word is the word min. The Septuagint Bible used the word genus. In other words, what went onto the ark, what were with Noah in the ark, were not the species. They were the genus. Species are way more than genus. You can have more genus, more species, and fewer genus. Like there are about 8 billion people on earth today, and we all belong to the same genus. We all belong to one genus. That is the Homo genus. So under Homo genus, we have 8 billion people. But how many species of human beings do we have today? Only one. Okay. But under the Homo genus, there were other species. We have Homo sapiens, we have the erectus, we have the habilis, neanderthalensis, denisovans. So you can have many species under one genus. So let's see what went onto the ark by understanding the word kind, which is the word genus, from which we get the word genus for classification of animals. A kind or a genus is a genetic ancestor capable of producing diverse offspring. And then we need to know what went onto the ark was a kind. It was a genus. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a fox, jackals, or domestic dogs. Those were not the selection criteria. Noah was to select the common ancestor of all these. Same applies to the equine, the horses, the donkeys, and the zebra. He didn't have to select individually from each. All he had to do was to select their common ancestor, the genus to which they all belong to. And over here you can see we have 3 species of them, but even under horses there are different species. If he was to select 2 pair from each, that would have overloaded the ark. That would have been unrealistic. Yes, the critics would have ridiculed it, but the specification states that they were to select a kind, the genus. That is, the genus selection was based on, it wasn't based on the species. Same applies to the feline. So for the feline kind, He didn't have to select lions, tigers, and then also leopards and cats. No, all he had to do was to select simply the genus, the common ancestor of all those organisms, because there are more species than genus. So if you put all those informations together, we are looking at a total of plus or minus 1,000 genera that were on the earth. Now, if you consider the individual groups under each, that will put the maximum number of animals on board. The individual animals, it shouldn't be more than say 5,000. We are looking at between 5,000 and 3,000 there. We won't even get to 10,000. These creatures carried with them rich genetic potential designed to fill the earth again, rapidly and uniquely adapted to the changing environment. So in the new world after the flood, the continents were fragmented. There were different climatic zones. Then the atmospheric pressure and oxygen levels changed. Predator-prey relationships were established. Plants and ecological pressures were also established, and it forced rapid adaptation. For the first 350 years of Noah's life, he would have witnessed a gradual increase in repopulation of the earth. Due to rapid adaptation, natural selection began to sort traits in population. Those with favorable characteristics will survive. Those that couldn't adapt quickly, they would have to perish. Creatures that migrated to cold regions adapted and were born with qualities or phenotypes that allows them to grow fair, fat, and also to hibernate, a quality they had acquired through genetic mutation. Those in the desert were also born developing the capability of nocturnal patterns, water retention mechanism, and heat regulation abilities, all born out of a useful mutation that they have acquired through birth. And we need to understand that adaptation is not the same as evolution of new kinds. Adapting will not lead to the formation of new genus. Actually, it's the other way around. No new genes were added. Actually, the new species, came out of pre-existing variation, and these variations are influenced by fertilization, being random, randomly mating, exposure to different environmental conditions that triggered or caused mutations that were useful, and there were factors that were internal, like crossing over, and also chromosomal rearrangement, random rearrangement. All these things produce a rich tapestry of unique diversity within the genome, as promoting diversity. Speciation also contributed to diversity explosion, as is the process by which isolated populations of a genus or a kind diverge into distinct species, and it occurs through genetic drift, environmental pressures, mutations within boundaries, loss or emphasis of certain traits. So, like in the post-flood wolves, they have to spread across Eurasia, and in the process, they randomly diverged. Some went north, some went south. Those that went north entered into the Arctic areas will actually develop thicker coats as they give birth to. And remember, the change occurs within the genes, not on the outside. So the change will have to occur inside the DNA before it can be expressed. So those that went into the colder regions gave birth to offspring that had thicker coats and the genetic capability to allow them to produce the phenotype that will allow them to survive. Eventually, the original or the ancestral genus that went into the Arctic died, and then the new generation of wolves that emerged all had thicker coats and they were genetically built to survive. Those that went south towards India actually developed, interestingly, shorter fur and leaner bodies because their conditions were not that cold, and so they maintain their genetic variation and their genetic makeup. Finches from a single ancestor adapted to different diets, like we have in the case of Darwin finches in Galapagos. Big cats filled forest. Those in forest, they developed different phenotypes. Those in the savannah adapted through camouflage to actually inhabit those areas, and those that are adapted to mountain life became what we called mountain cats, mountain lions, like we have it today. And those living in the tundra areas also have to adapt. Speciation was very rapid. Actually, it's a rapid process if all the conditions are available, most especially if competitions are low and there isn't any disaster, and organisms are able to adapt perfectly in that particular situation. In terms of migration, land animals migrated from the ark and had to travel wide and far looking for a place where there will be no competition so that they can reproduce. And they have to travel over several continents or to link up to other continents through land bridges, like we have today in North America and Asia. Others migrated via connected land masses, and until they became fully separated by the great oceans of the earth. And others had been carried by people, like livestock and pets and companion animals. Marsupials dominated places like Australia, likely isolated areas. We have llamas and alpacas, which fill the South Americas and these. And in Eurasia and North America, they had the bison and the mammoth. This dispersion explains biogeography without needing evolution, which will actually take millions of years. As we know, all life came from a common location and then spread out slowly, adapting along the way with sufficient time given. But then among all these things, some animals also became extinct. So we have many creatures that we know from fossil record that are in existence today, and most of the extinct creatures were on the ark. I'm talking about the genus. These couldn't, definitely they couldn't, because they're not used to the new world conditions. They failed to adapt post-flood climatic conditions and had to die out due to climate instability, food chain collapse. They were not used to the environment, human predation and disease. So dinosaurs became extinct gradually. They may have existed in the first 250 years after the flood, but then they would have gradually, slowly gone into extinction after the flood, as they couldn't cope with the low oxygen level in the new world. Saber-toothed cats, they were not able to compete because the ecosystem was totally different with less food available. Giant ground slug could have been used as a source of food by humans. These extinctions rather reshaped ecosystems, allowing only small animals to become even more adaptable and also to dominate. So what do we have here? From what we have discovered so far, on the ark were plus or minus 1,000 land genus. Specifically, we are talking about mammals, and they were preserved by God Himself. And then also, we look at the post-flood release. These animals left the ark into a radically changed world, and their existence were actually determined by climate pressures. And then in terms of movement, they were able to move across continents. This time they were not used to the single supercontinent. Now they have to move across the continent and adapt to the Earth's magnetic field lines to navigate their path, which they use as GPS, using land bridges and climates. All these things cause diversification and biodiversity caused by isolation and pressure. And then we have adaptations influenced by environmental pressures and to select favorable characteristics. So yes, natural selection played a role. Different kinds of species emerged from the genus, and some of the species separated or diverged into subspecies through speciation, leading to genetic divergence. And those that were poorly adapted or couldn't cope with the ever-changing environment disappeared, they died, and it led to an ecological imbalance, which will later on be filled in by other species. Every species traces back to original kinds, and this is what is called a design genetic variation. So yes, design for diversity. The creatures that left the earth, they were not finished products. They were not the end result. They were the genetic fountains. They were the genetic reservoir equipped with the genetic capability to adapt and diversify as the new world demanded. So no evolution of new kinds was necessary. The kinds were already there, so it's out of what is available came the new ones. God design allowed for remarkable plasticity. That's the germline or the genome was actually pliable. It was able to mold itself to adapt to the ever-changing environment to produce the requisite phenotype for the survival of the species. The rich variety of today's animals reflects not randomness, but intelligently preloading of life systems. So the whole scenario isn't a myth. It is something observable, something you can test, it's measurable, it's consistent scientifically, it's repeatable. There are constants that can be measured here. We have fossil record, we have biogeography, we have genetic evidence, we have climate data, and then we also have history in the form of scripture, which we can refer to. So what we need to know: when the floodwaters receded, Noah and his family stepped into a world vastly different. It was like a new world. The ship was like a time machine. The ark was like a time machine that they used to travel from one era into a new era. And so it was a world split by rivers, mountains, and oceans, marked by streams, freezing cold and scorching heat, deadly storm. There was a massive lack of natural balance, like the pre-flood world had. The 8 souls that came out would actually become the source of every nation of mankind, and then they will later on be scattered across the continents, and they will be adapting along the way and bringing out with them their innovation and surviving techniques. So what happened eventually in Genesis 9:11, according to Septuagint, it states that in the post-flood they were programmed to be fruitful and to multiply and to fill the earth. So what happened was human migration began from the station point of the ark, Ararat, and then there was a gradual spread outward, northwards towards Europe and Central Asia, southward to Mesopotamia, Africa, eastward into India, China, and beyond, and eventually crossing land bridges into the Americas. So how were they able to travel? They were able to travel as the continents were connected. Then also the climate was good. People were able to travel. It wasn't that hot. It was yet to be. The conditions were changing, and they migrated, or they went where they went to because of necessity, to avoid competition and also to gain access to food. Yes, with regards to shelter and clothing in a harsher climate, we have to know before the flood, clothing wasn't as critical as it is today, because the conditions were generally tropical. Genesis 2:25 confirms. So after the flood, Cold zones, people who found themselves in cold climates, required fur, leather, and woven garments. Harsh weather demanded tents, mud huts, and then and caves, and eventually some structures. So knowledge of craftsmanship passed down from pre-flood culture. For example, in Genesis 4 verse 22, we have Tubal Cain, allowed early post-flood families to forge tools, work metal, build complex structures. And we have archaeological evidence to support this claim, with ancient houses in places like the Catastrophe, the Jericho city, which is dated to be around 8000 BC, where there are evidence of rapid development of planned communities. Textiles, loom weights, and needles from early sites show clothing innovation began some 8,000 years ago. And with regards to agriculture and food production, we are looking at ecosystem that was recovering, considering Noah's family returning to farming and animal care. So in Genesis 9 verse 20, it states that, and Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted vineyard. A man of the soil is what we call farmer or a gardener. So that means he cultivated grains, vines, legumes, and herbs. So among many things that he farmed on, he also planted vineyard. So that means he also had domesticated animals from which he got milk, he got wool for making clothing. He was able to use them as a source of transport, and he also had meat, because remember, before the flood, they were all herbivores, and after the flood, now they were free to eat meat, so they became carnivores. But there's a catch, because during the post-flood, agriculture was harder, since the soils were less fertile. Remember, during the splitting of the earth, when the great waters of the deep opened, it brought up from the earth huge amount of sediments. This sedimentation would have contributed to massive erosion and rendering the soil less fertile, requiring plowing and irrigation. Seasons and droughts made food storage essential, and hunting and foraging remained important for centuries. So unlike the pre-flood world, which was very fertile, the post-flood became less fertile due to deposition of sedimentation across the entire face of the earth. With regards to language, culture, and the Tower of Babel, as is stated here in Genesis 10, the table of nations, as humanity multiplied, different family groups formed, early tribes and nations. So in Genesis 11, it's written, humanity tried to unite under rebellion, building the Tower of Babel. But unfortunately, God confused their language, forcing global dispersion. And what happened was, each group had knowledge of the pre-flood, like metalwork, astronomy, husbandry, and they carried those knowledge with them. And this explains why early civilization all across the world, they had similar systems despite geographical isolation. For example, if you look at the pyramids in Egypt, we have similar ones in Mesopotamia. We have also some in Mesoamerica. Even in Asia, even in China, they also build such structures, and they are very similar in design. And it suggests the early flood myths, according to the epic of Gilgamesh, in many cultures. So ancient calendars align with celestial events, and these events were passed down with knowledge from one generation to other generation. And then we have the rise of the early civilization, which rose up. It states that within just a few generations, descendants of Noah founded the first cities and empires. So over here we have the Sumer, where we look at Nimrods, Babel, and we have Erech, and then we have Akkad, and then we have Egypt, which was founded, that is Mizraim. We have Canaanite city-states like Sidon, Gaza's Jebus, and then we have Elamites, Syrians, Hittites, Cushites, and then all these civilizations were built with similar materials. They were all built with stone and bricks, practiced irrigation, domestication, developed writing system, the cuneiform and the hieroglyphics that we have today. They practiced paganism, many influenced by the Nephilim and fallen spirits, seeking to restore pre-flood rebellion. With regards to surviving technologies and human ingenuity, we have to know humans used inherited skills from pre-flood times. We have metal tools like the bronze and the iron. We have poetry, and then we have cooking vessels, weaponry for protection and hunting, and navigation by stars for migration and timing of planting seasons. Many ancient inventions appear advanced for the time. For example, we have water clocks, cooler systems, surgical tools, advanced architecture, as seen in temples and ziggurats today. All these things points to and reflects retained knowledge from pre-flood fathers like Enoch, Lamech, and Noah. It is most probable, and I believe the premise of Giza were built before the flood, and so today we are trying to contemplate how they were built. So from 8 to all, we have to understand that out of the ark came one family, one language, one origin point, but within a few generations, the earth was filled with nations, languages, cities, and empires. Yet all of them bore the mark of the flood, building lives on the remnant of a world judged but not forgotten. So he states here, Acts 17:26, from one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. So based on this categorization, our present world as it is today came out of a world of chaos, a world of destruction, a world of evil. Evil became good. How did evil turn into good? Because evil was destroyed. And out of the remnants of evil came Noah. God did not create a new human or a new Adam. It was still the old fallen Adam that became the new breed, the new kind from which Jesus Christ will appear from. So this is a solid exposition, a solid exploration of the Great Flood story. This is a part 3, and it marks the end of it. But I'm pleased to say the Great Flood story wasn't the end, because it led to something else, something sinister. That is the rise of the Shadim, the demons, the souls of the Nephilim, the new gods and the new arrivals. I have already done a study on it. You can check it on my YouTube page. You will learn more about these entities. It will guide you and lead you into the study of what the church is dealing with today, the evil that once was is still prevailing. What prevailed, what existed in the pre-flood world is still existing in the post-flood world. So the new study on Shadim will greatly change how you see everything in context. What God called the souls of the Nephilim, the new gods, the new arrival. And currently I'm busy with a study on Genesis. So if you have been inspired or challenged by what you've heard so far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a single insight. I'm also inviting you to watch and listen to my special presentation on Genesis. It's gonna be an eye-opener, a study that explores the foundations of our world, the nature of humanity, the unfolding story of God's purpose. And we are going to actually grow together, explore, and hence I'm encouraging you to click subscribe and join me in this new video presentation. And here it is. It's about Genesis, the history of creation, and I'm going to explore how the universe was created to the detail. We're going to go deep into it to see how the universe was not created from nothing. That is the popular notion we have today, that everything came out of nothing. Well, the current evidence suggests otherwise, that that idea that everything came out of nothing is incorrect. Things usually come out of other things, and that is what you should know. One thing has to give birth to another. Everything came out of something. So Genesis is going to reveal, it's going to open your eyes. So if you are blessed by this video, make sure you subscribe. God bless you, and thank you very much for joining me.